The 1990s were a mixed bag for Marvel Comics. Despite some huge commercial success in the early parts of the 90s due to Marvel mainstays such as the X-Men and Spider-Man, Marvel were building a house on sand. The speculator boom, the idea that comics would become worth huge amounts of money if bought and stored correctly, was one doomed to failure. Based on the immense worth of comics like Action Comics #1, Amazing Fantasy #15 and Detective Comics #27, people thought their copy of X-Force #1 would become equally valuable in time. This ignored the fact that these comics were worth so much not just because they contained the first appearances of major characters, but also because they were printed in a time when comics were cheap and disposable. Action Comics is basically impossible to find, but any comic book shop will probably contain a copy of the 90s X-Men issue 1. This wasn't helped by the fact that a huge part of Marvel's success at the time was with special collectible covers that would mean one collector would buy the same comic 5 times. So Marvel was making a lot of money, until it wasn't. On top of that, creatively Marvel was at a low. Heroes Reborn, The Clone Saga, The Crossing, Maximum Carnage, X-Men Phalanx Covenant all came from this time period. Comic books, much like everything else in the 90s, were obsessed with being extreme. So it shouldn't shock anyone that in 1997, Marvel filed for bankruptcy. They managed to keep publishing comics, don't ask me how, I understand money about as well as any recently graduated student, and completely revamped themselves. They ended Heroes Reborn and entered what some may call a golden age, including me. Actually, especially me. Between the years of 1998 and 2005 we had Kevin Smith's Daredevil, Alias by Brian Michael Bendis, The Avengers by Kurt Busiek, J. Michael Straczynski's Amazing Spider-Man, Daredevil by Brian Michael Bendis, Grant Morrison's New X-Men, Mark Waid's Fantastic Four, The Punisher by Garth Ennis, Jeff Loeb's Color Series, including perhaps one of the best Spider-Man books ever, Spider-Man Blue, The Runaways by Brian K. Vaughan, Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon, She-Hulk by Dan Slott, and 1602 by Neil frickin' Gaiman. Top talent working on some of the best Marvel runs of all time. And I feel like I'm forgetting one. Oh yeah, the topic of this video, Ultimate Spider-Man. See, along with taking these rising indie stars or just crazy talented individuals and putting them on top level books, Marvel also decided that the universe in which Spider-Man had multiple clones and possibly a baby was a little bit too complex for the new reader. The character was bogged down in too much complexity, too much history, and, at that point, a rather lackluster run. So they decided to launch the Ultimate Universe, a modern day retelling of Marvel's top heroes, all under one imprint. And Spider-Man, being the company's most recognisable and beloved hero, was chosen as the starting point. And so, with the up-and-coming talent Brian Michael Bendis on words and longtime Spider-Man penciler Mark Bagley at the helm, Ultimate Spider-Man launched in the year 2000, and it was an explosion of colour on the drained, grey Spider-Man comics of the time. So that's a whole lot of history, but why should you, dear viewer, read this book? Well, to put it simply, the original 160-issue run of Ultimate Spider-Man is the perfect distillation of the high school Spider-Man everyone thinks they love. See, what people often forget about Peter Parker's time in high school is it was actually incredibly short. He graduated in issue 28 in 1965, 4 years into the original book's run. For comparison's sake, he was in college until issue 185, or, for those keeping score at home, the year 1978. And on top of that, most of the things people love from this era of Spider-Man are from his college years. Whilst the high school age books aren't bad, Peter is pretty much one-dimensional, goody two-shoes nerd character. Think a more charismatic Blue Ranger from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. He has no real friends, the entire supporting cast is jerks who bully him, and Betsy Brandt. The Betty and Veronica style love triangle of Mary Jane Watson and Gwen Stacy? College. Peter becoming best friends with his arch-nemesis' son Harry Osborn? College. Classic stories such as The Night Gwen Stacy Died, If This Be My Destiny, and Spider-Man No More all took place in his college years. But what Ultimate Spider-Man does so well is take all these elements and transpose them into Peter Parker's high school life. Gone are the one-dimensional teenagers and goody two-shoes Peter Parker, and in comes a shockingly good portrayal of high school life mixed with high-flying superheroics. Bendis drags the characters and the stories of the original Amazing Spider-Man run into the year 2000 with everything a modern reader could want. The characters are all likeable and complex, the stories are all well fleshed out, and all the villains you know and love have had the sillier aspects of their origin stories sanded off. And it presents a much more modern take on the idea of heroism. Look no further than its second arc, Learning Curve. Spider-Man comes up against the Kingpin for the first time and has to learn a valuable lesson. His fists can't solve everything. He has to outsmart his enemies. And for another example, in the fifth arc, Public Scrutiny, we are given an actual reason for the public to hate Spider-Man. Because he hides behind a mask, anyone can pretend to be Spider-Man, and they do. It's smart, it's modern, and it puts a great twist on the character of the chameleon. And the teen drama is well handled too. Or is as well handled as any teen drama can be, if that isn't your sort of thing. Peter Parker's entire social circle is fleshed out and interesting, and their relationships and dramas are incredibly relatable for those of us who have been to high school in the past 20 years or so. Of course, the angst and drama can sometimes get a little unbearable, and the characters' actions can be grating even if they do make sense in the horrifying world of teenage hormones and territorial pissing that is high school. Add on to that, this is one of the first comics that really took advantage of decompressed storytelling. To explain for those who don't know, for a long time comics were very word heavy, stories were generally short and action packed. However, in the late 90s and early 2000s, decompression started happening more and more, basically transforming one and done comics into something more akin to a TV show. Scenes became slower, and storylines began to contain more elements. Arcs that would have been maybe 1 or 2 issues became 5 or 6. And Ultimate Spider-Man has this bad. For me personally, I don't mind it. The Breathing Room works wonders for a book like this, as Bendis' fast-paced, quippy dialogue is given lots of room to breathe, and actually works very well here. However, if you hate that sort of stuff, you may want to give this one a miss. Of course, on top of that, I could tell you about how Bagley and later Immonen's artwork is great, how every updated villain is a smart and interesting take, how it actually made the Clone Saga work, and how it also had an incredibly good video game adaptation. But what matters is that this book is the perfect distillation and interpretation of everything Spider-Man. The characters, the villains, the stories, the tone, the message, all of them are contained brilliantly within these 160 issues. A complete story, a complete arc. It's brilliant, one of the greatest comic books of all time in my humble opinion, and whether you've just seen Spider-Man Homecoming and want to read about the web swinger for the first time, or you're a grizzled vet who somehow managed to miss this book, I highly recommend you check it out. Thank you so much for watching, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and tell me about some of your favourite Spider-Man stories.